In fact, I'd like to start by thanking everybody who subscribed to my YouTube channel, as I've just exceeded 1,000 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you do, what will happen is you'll get emailed whenever I put a new talk onto YouTube. And the second point that I made some time ago, but just a reminder that all the talks I give have got full notes in PDF format that's available on my website, which is down here, www.shafe.uk, and on the website there's notes of all the talks if you want more detail. Right, in this second part I'm going to talk about 6 more forgers, and the image you can see here is La Bella Principessa, and many claim it's by Leonardo, but one of the artists I'm going to be talking about today claims that he drew it himself using a supermarket checkout girl as the model. And I think that and that dispute still goes on. He claims he drew it, and lots of the experts claim it's a genuine Leonardo. So I think that just demonstrates the degree of uncertainty in the market, even for an artist as well known as Leonardo. So let's look at the artists that I'm going to be covering today. And again, they're in order of their date of birth. So it's the oldest first is Ken Perenyi. I'll be talking about Tony Tetro, Wolfgang Beltracchi, German artist, Mark Landis, British artist Shaun Greenhalgh, and Robert Driessen. And apologies if I'm not covering your favorite forger, as there's so many. I'll just mention a few that you might have heard of. Walter Keane, and he's the artist who took credit for his wife's work. His wife is the artist who produced those popular paintings of children with very big eyes. David Henty sold many fakes on eBay until he was banned for life, and then all he did was he registered with a new name and carried on selling on eBay. Jonathan Rayfern, he was jailed for forging the works of Tracy Emin. William or Billy Mumford, another British artist, jailed for 2 years for creating over 1,000 forgeries, which again he sold on eBay. So be careful if you buy anything on eBay. Christine Eubanks, possibly the first, well, certainly the first woman forger that I've mentioned. Maybe there are others who haven't been caught. She, with her husband, Gerald Sullivan, she sold fake and forged artworks on television. She sold to more than 10,000 victims and made something like $20 million. But I think the ones I've chosen, the ones you can see here, are the ones that if you do research onto forgery, these are the ones that crop up most often, the most well known that we know about that have been caught. So let's start with Ken Perenyi. The question is, which is by Ken Perenyi? You probably guessed that it's Monet. But which one is Monet and which one is Ken Perenyi? In fact, it surprised me that it's Ken Perenyi who's painting in a more conventional manner than Monet. In other words, it's this way round, or as the Metropolitan Museum of Art puts it in their description of the painting on the right. The flicker of individual brushstrokes reflects Monet's concern with recording sensations of colour and light as accurately as possible. Ironically, this practice resulted in paintings of an increasingly abstract nature. Indeed, the imagery nearly dissolves in the myriad touches of paint. End quote, with the result, possibly, that Ken Perenyi is almost dare I say it, more Monet than Monet. He's an American artist, and when he was young, he read about Van Meegeren, the forger I talked about in part 1, and the way he was taken by the way he'd fooled the art world. The idea appealed to him. So when later he failed to make a living as an artist, he started to use similar techniques. And he didn't go to art school, he wasn't formally trained, but he taught himself by going around the art. This is a picture of him, this is Ken Perenyi, going around art dealers, asking about pigments, brushes, canvases, techniques. How did the artist do it? And he absorbed it all and experimented himself and learned to copy their techniques exactly. He's a talented artist, in other words. He consciously, I suppose that all forgers do, but he consciously used his skill to create forgeries. He enjoyed making money. He enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. He admits he also enjoyed the excitement of fooling the experts, but he's not one that did it for that reason. I think his primary drive was simply to make money by exploiting what he saw as the greed of dealers and buyers, and to make a lot of money for himself at the same time. And in fact, if you listen to interviews with him, he's quite proud of his achievement. Now, he started by faking Dutch old masters, but he got to talking to various people, one of whom was a well-known art collector, and he suggested he switch to painting in the style of 19th century American artists because they sold well in America. And he started finding money flowing in. He expanded from New York to selling in London and the rest of Europe. When he started, he was selling works for around $300 a painting, like the price of a good copy. He ended up, his highest price painting was $717,000, nearly $750,000 for one painting that he sold as an original, a forgery of the original by the American artist Martin Heed, who painted one of these two paintings here. So the others by Perenyi and the others by Heed. Heed was a well-known and much sought after painter of landscapes, flower paintings, and tropical birds, as you see here. Well, it's the one on the right is Heed, and Perenyi is on the left. And I mean, that was just one example. He sold many, many works and became a millionaire. He said later, after he'd been exposed, painting consumed my life. I lived to paint. And he spent 30 years without being caught, accumulating a small fortune and living the good life. Eventually, he said in 1998, the FBI turned up at his kitchen door and wanted him to admit. He refused to admit to anything. In fact, he said he was surprised they turned up. He couldn't work out why they turned up. For 30 years, he'd just been producing these forgeries without thinking about it. It was just his business. It was just a way of life. So he couldn't work out why they'd turned up, but it clicked. The investigation went on for a further 5 years, but what happened was that all the works that the FBI had, which were produced by Perenyi, had been sold by dealers and auction houses, not by Perenyi. So they couldn't find any fakes that he had sold himself. So they couldn't charge him. But he decided to leave the criminal world of forgery behind because he realized that he would soon be caught. And he started to paint legitimate fakes that he now sells as reproductions. And then what happened is that the statute of limitations kicked in. And in America, I think there are exceptions, but in America, it's 4 years for this type of fraud. So 4 years after the last forgery, if you like, that he'd produced and sold, he was in the clear. And in 2012, he published a book, Caveat Emptor, The Secret Life of an American Art Forger. And that became a bestseller. It made his name, so the value of his work started to go up. And he talks about how over those 3 decades, he created thousands of replicas of masters like Heed, and also other well-known American 19th century artists like James Butterworth, which one of these is by Butterworth and one's by Perenyi. And he also lived and worked in England. He lived in the Royal Crescent in Bath and started to and did learn how to fake British 19th century artists, which he sold in London quite successfully. But he returned to America and produced this Butterworth. His is the one on the right, or imitation of Butterworth, I should say. And as I said, he now sells legal reproductions. And in fact, the one on the right is for sale on his website today. And he says he's now doing better now. He's selling more works at a higher price because he's well known. And he paints the original artist's signature on the painting, refuses to sign his own name. I think you could just about make out here, it says Butterworth, because he thinks that if he put his own name on, it would compromise the integrity of the fake, is what he said. And he feels that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and that his work is praising or paying a tribute to the great artists of the past. He did also add in one of his interviews, he was asked, but could anybody make a living as a forger today with all of the closer scrutiny? And he says that yes, they could. What he would do if he was starting out as a forger, this is hints and tips to forgers, he would look for prime targets, such as recently recognized artists selling well in auctions, whose value is been rapidly increasing in the auction rooms. But because they're a recently recognized artist, little would be known about them. And so it'd be easy to produce a work in the same style without anybody knowing, because there wouldn't be a catalogue raisonné. There's no, it's very hard to check whether that would be a work by the artist. So moving on from Ken Perenyi to Tony Tetro. Now, I think it's clear here that he's intentionally sitting in the same way as Pablo Picasso, and you can see in front of him he's this is a work called Nature Morte, or Still Life, 1960 by Picasso, which he has copied. He's not like Perenyi. Tony Tetro is not wasn't formally trained as an artist, but again he learned from books and by experimenting. And again, over 3 decades, he forged works by many artists, a wide range actually, from Rembrandt to Juan Miro, Marc Chagall, Salvador Dali, Norman Rockwell, and as you see here, Pablo Picasso. But let me show you another artist that he forged, William Adolphe Bouguereau. And the question is, which is the copy? Well, let me give you a bit of background first. He was born in 1950 in a little town called Fulton, which is in the sort of northwest of New York State, part of what's called the Rust Belt in America. His father wasn't wealthy. He was a house painter. And Tony Tetro had no formal art training, as I said. But part of learning how to paint, he liked to copy famous paintings as an exercise. And then he started to sell them at art fairs as copies. He would take them along, and he became quite, they sold well because people found that his copies were flawless, as good as the original. So because he painted such good copies, he could sell them easily and for a fair amount of money at art fairs as copies. He moved to Los Angeles and continued to sell copies. He actually says he never marketed them as originals, and showed his business card which said art reproductions. But dealers told him they sold them to people who couldn't afford the originals. However, someone must have been selling them as originals, as he started to make a lot more money. And I think he must have become aware that the dealers were selling them and the auction houses were selling them as originals. Look at this one. One of these is Bulgaro, which is the copy. You might think that it's the one on the right, because if you look at the eyes of the standing woman, they seem slightly wrong or looking in the wrong direction. They're not looking at us. But in fact, it's the other way round. The one on the right is Bulgaro. The one on the left is Tony Tetro. Now, he liked to live a good life with the money he spent, but he never travelled into work each day. He stayed at home. He loved fast cars, fast women, and hard drinking, as he put it. So his neighbours assumed he was a drug dealer, and so did the police. And so his house was frequently raided by the police, but they weren't looking for paintings. They were looking for drugs. And in the end, he was arrested for drug dealing, but the police found no evidence. Nothing was presented in court. But the police were thought that the fact that they couldn't explain how he made money, but in court he explained he made money by selling reproductions. So he was released. That was the end of the matter. And he was eventually caught when an artist, Hiro Yamagata, a Japanese artist who lived in Los Angeles, walked into Beverly Hills Gallery and saw a copy of his own work, a forgery of his own work, which he knew he'd never painted. The gallery knew that they'd obtained it from Tony Tetro. They called the police. The police searched his home, looking this time not for drugs, but forgeries, and they found 250 in his house. The district attorney called him one of the two major art forgers in the United States. So he became well known. In fact, this pair of paintings caused me problems distinguishing the copy from the original by Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. There are slight differences between the two paintings, probably the result of the image quality. He was very good. In fact, he rated other forgers as well. He said that 3 of the forgers we covered last week. He said De Hori, if you remember De Hori, the Hungarian artist who was imprisoned by the Nazis for being Jewish and homosexual. And he said De Hori was good, Van Meegeren was overblown, and Eric Hebborn was very good. He was the one that I showed you a Van Dyck drawing and a Claude and that drawing from his book of a Coro. So here, which is the Tiepolo, which is the Tetro? The Tetro's on the right. So he was arrested, tried. The cost of the lawyer bankrupted him, but he insisted in court that he'd only ever copied works and never intended to sell them as originals. It was the dealers who misrepresented his work, and he was critical in court of the whole art market. He said things like, often regarding experts, often instead of facts, their opinion is based on relationships, peer pressure and greed. And regarding the gallery salesman, like most dealers, he could have been selling timeshares or diet pills, and the auction houses much more worried about controversy than finding fakes. And he added, real or fake, the art business rolled on. It simply didn't matter to anybody. So at the end of the trial, the jury was deadlocked. So it was a mistrial. They couldn't agree. They were sent out 3 times, but said they couldn't agree on whether he was guilty. And the district attorney decided to retry the case. But by this time, as I said, he was bankrupt. He had no money. So he entered a plea of nolo contendere, which is neither pleading guilt. In some states in America, it's a valid plea. It's not guilty or not guilty, it basically means no contest, or I have no defense. And it's usually regarded as a guilty plea, but it's a bit different in that you're not found guilty in the sense that if there's a later civil case, the verdict cannot be used against you in a civil case. So he was found, the second time round, he was found guilty and sentenced to community service. And in fact, during community service, he painted a large mural on a wall and received 5 years probation. He then, because it became known publicly, he was in a BBC documentary, in magazine articles, explaining how you forge a masterpiece. And he continues to produce copies for private clients, which require, or during his probation period, he was required to get a court order to sign off each of his works that he produced. He's incidentally very down to earth, and he's made some interesting points. First of all, his view is the forger is not someone who, some mystical process communing with the artist's mind until you can effortlessly paint whatever they would have done. He regards it as just a regular job. He started every morning at the same time in a secret room in his apartment, and clocked off at the same time every day. So it was just another job to him. He was also asked why, if lots of artists have the skill to paint copies close to the original, why more artists don't become forgers, which I think it's a bit like asking why more of us don't start phoning people selling fraudulent stocks, or if you like, why don't most of us become criminals? His answer was, being a great forger is not being a great artist, but rather a convincing storyteller. You have to be constantly on the lookout for a weak point, an opening, a mistake, a bit of uncertainty that allows your work a chance to exist. Like the best con artist, you must create a context and a backstory that justify an otherwise unbelievable circumstance. Like, how did you get hold of this Matisse? Well, just to pick up that point, actually, and explain the lengths that you need to go to. Tetro at one point needed to convince a dealer that he had a Matisse, a genuine Matisse, which of course was a forgery. So what he did is he bought a catalogue raisonné, which for Matisse, they're quite expensive. They're about £2,000 second-hand for a catalogue of the complete works of Matisse. Then he cut out a page and replaced it with a carefully printed copy of his fake painting, made to look like a page of the book. Then he added labels and covers and so on to make it look like a library book, and he simply put it in on the shelf of the library nearest to the dealer. And then he stole the dealer's own copy of the book, so the unsuspecting dealer, when he went to check in his catalogue raisonné, couldn't find it, so visited the local library to check the painting, found it in the book, and that was that. So that's the sort of lengths that he would go to. He says that today radiocarbon dating, spectroscopic analysis would uncover most of his forgeries, but they do still turn up. The most recent scandal, if you like, involving Tony Tetro was 2019, when it was reported in the press that 4 of the 17 paintings that had been loaned to the then Prince Charles for his Dumfries house were not works by Picasso, Dali, Monet and Chagall, but were fakes painted by Tony Tetro, and they were removed from display. It was in the papers at the time. Another artist, Wolfgang Beltracchi, with his wife, Helen, in their studio, standing next to a forged painting in the style of Max Ernst. And this is one of a series of works that Ernst produced called The Hoard. And so what Beltracchi was doing was painting another work in the same theme, because it wasn't clearly known how many works Max Ernst had painted in the series. Having a series, if an artist paints a series of similar paintings, it's a good opening for a forger. He was actually born Wolfgang Fischer in Germany and was the son of an art restorer. He was surrounded, he said, when he was young, by painting all the time. His brother, other members of the family, and his father were painting in their own right, restoring paintings, explaining how the old masters painted and so on. And his father challenged him to copy a Pablo Picasso when he was 14, which he did. And there's a story that probably circulated by Beltracchi himself, that his father was so impressed and dismayed by how good his son was that he stopped painting himself for 2 years. Probably untrue. Well, Beltracchi was expelled from school, went to art school, and became what was called at the time a hippie. He used drugs. He started what he described as a little art forgery, traveled across Europe, lived in Amsterdam, opened an art gallery with a business partner, but that failed. And then in 1992, when he was 41, he met Helen, and they got married shortly after, and he took her name. Her name was Helen Beltracchi. Now, he didn't copy existing paintings like many forgers, but paint his subjects in the style of famous paintings, as we see here with the Max Ernst. He made up titles. He invented false provenance by forging, and I think I've got another I've got another painting here in the series produced by Max Ernst, just to show you the differences and the similarities, so you can see more clearly what he was doing here. I said he was made up provenance. Well, the claim was that the story that they put together, she said in an interview that he told her what he was doing, that he was an art forger, within, I think she said, 3 days of the meeting. So she was part of the scam, and they claimed that her grandfather was friends with a well-known Jewish art dealer in the 1920s. And when the war came, the dealer fled, leaving her grandfather with a large collection of paintings. And in fact, she did have a wealthy grandfather, but and who knew art dealers, but he probably wasn't a friend of them because he was a member of the Nazi Party. So the story is probably untrue, but it had enough elements in it for them to be able to convince art dealers. And to add to the scam, what they did is and I've got one here. See this photograph? They showed it to art dealers as a photograph of her grandmother with the paintings on the walls of her house behind her. But these photographs were forged. The model was Helene herself, dressed up as her grandmother, and they'd made the photographs look old. And his forgeries, I think we're going to see this one in a minute. The forgeries and he put on the wall, and then took the photograph, made it look old, and used that as the evidence for the story that I explained. So that's a sort of the sort of level of detail you have to go to to convince an art dealer of the story that you've made up. Another example, he was actually caught because of this painting of Heinrich Campendonck. And I've shown you here a genuine Campendonck. It's not meant to be, it's in the same style. As I said, he didn't copy paintings, he painted in the same style. It was sold at auction. The fake was sold at auction in Cologne for nearly 3 million euros, 2.9 million euros. But then the person who bought it had it tested scientifically and found out that it was a fake. And Beltracchi was most annoyed because the scientific test showed there were traces of titanium white, which were only went on sale. It only became available as a pigment in 1921. And Beltracchi knew this, and he wouldn't have used titanium white. He said he bought zinc white, a Dutch product, a tube of zinc white, but unfortunately it didn't say on the tube of paint that it contained a small amount of titanium white, or as he said, to Der Spiegel. In other words, the whole thing was discovered because of an incorrectly labeled tube. Another story that was in the press was that the German police believe that the well-known American actor and comedian Steve Martin played a minor role as a victim in what I think was probably Germany's biggest art forgery scandal, the Beltracchi scandal. So Steve Martin bought this work, Landscape with Horses, as a genuine, what he thought was a genuine Campendonck, for 700,000 euros. Obviously, as I said, another one on the right sold for 2.9 million. So a bargain basement. And as they say, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. But he paid 700,000 euros for the one in the bottom left. And therefore essentially lost the money. Another example, the Cubist painting on the left is supposedly by Fernand Léger, was also created by Beltracchi. And I've given you two other examples so you can see how he's painting in the same sort of series or style. This is a series of paintings Léger painted in 1913, 1914. It was a sequence of 14 canvases. And as I said, when an artist produces a series, it's a good opportunity for a forger to produce what appears to be another one in the series. And in fact, this is a well-known series because many people see this as a breakthrough, an advance beyond Cubism, because if you look at Cubist work by Picasso and Braque, it got elements of representation in it, whereas these are purely abstract. So he's moved beyond Cubism into pure abstraction. And 1913 is the very beginning, is one of the earliest dates of artists painting purely abstract shapes and colors. So it was a major turning point or major movement in the art world when Léger created this series. And it's all explained in a film of his life called Beltracchi, The Art of Forgery, where if you watch it, he says it's easier to sell a work for $500,000 than 10,000, because everybody assumes it's not a fake. If you're selling it for $500,000, everybody assumes someone else has checked it. So as long as you can convince the dealer or the auction house with your story, then from then on, although a few people check, and that's how he got caught, most people just assume it's not a fake. Another series by, again, one of these is by Max Ernst, a different series that he painted in the 20s and 30s, looking like a forest, but he wanted to paint paintings that were arose from the subconscious by finding random patterns, and he did that in various ways, but one way is a technique called grattage, where he would drop a piece of canvas on a wooden floor covered in oil paints, and then scrape the oil paint over the surface of the canvas, picking up the texture of the floor underneath. And then he would look at those patterns, and he would turn the work into a semi-representation of, say, a forest, and add, as we see here, a solar disk, and add often a bird amongst the trees. So that's what Beltracchi's done. He's used a grattage, a similar technique to fake, and the painting on the left, the Beltracchi, was actually authenticated as genuine, sold for several $1 million, and was even displayed in the Max Ernst Museum for a period. And interestingly, he produced so many Campendonk forgeries that when he was interviewed by Der Spiegel, the newspaper, they asked him, your Campendonk forgeries led to an explosion in prices for his paintings because so many were becoming available. And Beltracchi said, yes, prices tripled. And the same thing happened with Max Ernst. And in fact, his widow, Dorothea Tanning, an artist in her own right, said that one of my forgeries was the most beautiful Max Ernst painting she'd ever seen. And he added, the trick is to paint a picture that doesn't exist, yet fits perfectly into an artist's body of work. And it's estimated, no one really knows, but it's estimated that he made some 30 million euros, making him one of the richest forgers, particularly compared to the following chap, Mark Landis, a very unusual forger. He toured America, fooling over 50 museums in 20 states, but he never asked for any money. He donated his forgeries as genuine works, and he wanted to be seen as a well-known philanthropist. When he was young, his parents, he traveled around the world with his parents as his father was in the Navy. He was close to his father, so when his father died when he was just 15, the following year he was diagnosed with a variety of mental illnesses that stayed with him the rest of his life. He studied art and opened a gallery, but it failed. He returned to live with his mother, and to please her, he said, and a film's been made of him, to please her, he donated a fake to a museum in California as an original, and it worked so well, it was so successful, they thanked him so much that it made him happy, and he continued to donate fake works for the next 20 years. He also made some money selling his own work, because there was an organization in America that sold work painted by artists with mental illnesses, and he sold his work through that organization. I mean, it sold, I don't mean he was made a lot of money, but he made enough to keep himself going. So let's see some of his copies. This is a copy he donated by Paul Signac. And in 2007, he donated several works he tended to donate to small museums who didn't have the resources to check, but he donated to a larger museum, the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, and the curator decided to investigate the works and found similar pieces, too similar, had been donated to other museums. So he went on investigating further, and he eventually found that Landis had donated many works to some 60 museums in 20 states using different aliases. One of the aliases he used, because he also donated to churches, museums and churches, he dressed up as a Jesuit priest and then had a story about how he'd come across a work of art and wanted to donate it to the church. But he hadn't really committed any crime. In 2010, there was an article published exposing him, followed by an article in the Financial Times. But the police found he'd broken no laws, or as one expert put it in the film, basically you have a guy going around the country on his own nickel giving free stuff to museums. However, it wasn't cost-free because it's estimated that the damage, I don't know how they estimated it, but the damage brought about by his gifts was about $5 million. But he'd broken no laws. Just an example, this is actually a still from the documentary about him called Art and Craft. And as I said, this is an extreme close-up that you can see how small this is, because this here is his finger holding it down, and this is a magnifying glass looking at the detail, and he's just about to use his brush to put a dot of blood just here on Christ's hand. He would then dress as a Jesuit priest with a story of how he obtained it. The museums and galleries and churches were dismayed by this point because they didn't know how to stop him. So the University of Cincinnati, I think, to give more publicity to his activities, held an exhibition called Faux Real, displaying 60 of his works alongside his Jesuit priest's costume, which he donated to the exhibition. And in fact, he attended the exhibition as the guest of honor. The film was then made, the film I mentioned, a documentary about his life was made. And he explains in the film how he went about the process of creating the art, as you see here, how he painted this work. And then he shows how he went along and the story he told and how he donated his work to the church in this case. And he made up various stories. So each time he would often invent a sister as the owner of the work. So if they asked awkward questions, he would say he didn't know, his sister would know, but he was just selling it on her behalf. Tricks like that he would use. This is another work he admits faking. Charles Courtney Curran was a well-known and collected American artist, often painted women engaged in various activities. Early in his career, Curran painted working class women. Later, he went to Paris for 2.5 years. This is Curran, and painted scenes of well-dressed women, as we see here. And he produced over 1,500 paintings, and so he was a good artist to copy because he was collected as well. So this is a Mark Landis fake that he gave to a museum, and he admits that he stained the panel on which it's painted with coffee to make it look old. So he he produced works that looked their age, and he added, you get better with practice. So he practiced how to do that, but he never asked for any money. Another example, he didn't just copy 19th century American artists. Here's a drawing. I couldn't find a better copy of this, of the Landis drawing, in the style of the French painter Jean-Antoine Watteau, who painted in the early 18th century. Watteau was the artist who revitalized the waning Baroque style and shifted to this less severe, more naturalistic style called Rococo. So he could draw, he could paint. Here's another example of a Mark Landis copy of Stuart Davis. Stuart Davis was an early American modernist. This is a very early work, 1914-18. Davis became a member of the Ashcan School in New York, and in the 1940s and 50s, he's better known for painting in these bold, colourful proto-pop art paintings. And Landis, to return to Landis, an exhibition of his work was held recently in New York. And the theme of the exhibition was to raise questions of appropriation, authenticity, and the way value is created. And that led to a panel discussion of the idea of creating what are called non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. And I'll talk more about NFTs later. One of my favorite forgers, Shaun Greenhalgh, worked from his garden shed, was a master of many styles, many media, and he produced this forged Egyptian relic. But he could produce something like this one day, or an L.S. Lowry painting the next. Now, this forgery was authenticated by the British Museum as an Amarna princess. The British Museum claimed it was 3,000-year-old masterpiece. They valued at £440,000, but it was actually carved by Greenhalgh in his shed using a saw he'd bought from B&Q, and, as he put it, a bit of elbow grease. By the way, this is a genuine statuette from the same period in the Louvre, and it's one of only two of this type in the world. And if you look at the figure in the Louvre on the left, it's Nefertiti, and if you compare her with the Greenhalgh, you can sort of see the stylistic similarities that the British Museum latched onto. In fact, the forgery was so successful, it now has its own, the forgery has its own Wikipedia page, and there on that page there are 33 references to articles about it in the press. So it was partly, I think it was because the British Museum had been fooled that it became such a notorious piece. Incidentally, sculptures are easier to fake as they're more difficult to authenticate, more difficult to date. And what they did to fool the British Museum, just to explain again the detail behind the work, the Greenhalghs, because in fact it was a father and son team, it was the son who was the artist and the father worked with him. They bought an 1892 sales catalogue of an auction of the contents of Silverton Park in Devon, which was the home of the 4th Earl of Egremont. Now, the 4th Earl wasn't a collector, but his ancestors were, and so the house could well have contained items that his ancestors had collected. And in the catalogue, there is a description of, which reads, a draped figure of a female, 5 marble statuettes and 8 Egyptian figures. That's all it says. which of course is a vague description. So Greenhalgh, who was a professional antiques dealer and a meticulous researcher, would have known the figure he produced, would have known the work in the Louvre, would have known the vagueness in the description, and produce something that fitted in, that an expert would believe fitted into all of those pieces of evidence. The sales catalogue was genuine, and the British Museum would have had access to the catalogue as well. He was very versatile. There's another, I thought I'd show you another statuette. This is a ceramic sculpture called the Faun, supposedly created by Paul Gauguin in the 1880s. In reality, it was Shaun Greenhalgh again. This is another very successful ruse, and again, it was authenticated by experts and sold, this time for millions, and displayed at the Art Institute of Chicago for 10 years. What gave it away? Well, the Greenhalgh family, who had been working together on forgeries for a while, were caught selling the previous work I showed you, the Amarna Princess, and that publicity was raised concerns, and the work was investigated more carefully. If you compare it with a genuine Gauguin sculpture, this one, Thérèse, you can see differences in the style. This one on the left is stylized Polynesian woman, and in fact it disappeared around 1980. So again, it would have been a candidate for a forger, but it was rediscovered in 2015. What we believe to be the genuine work in a London gallery. It's said to depict the servant that there's of the Catholic bishop Joseph Martin, who Gauguin believed had sexual relations with his employees, including this servant. So it caused at the time a scandal, and it was sold at Christie's, the one on the left, for over $30 million against an estimate of 18 to 25 million. But he also painted paintings by artists like Lowry. This is going to the match, and I've labeled them correctly. He's painting, Lowry, of course, might have painted more than one going to the match, and so he's painted a slightly different version of the Lowry, and it's a copy. It's not a copy, it's another version that Lowry might have painted. So eventually in 2006, because of the Amarna Princess, he was arrested, sentenced to 4 years, 8 months in prison. He got out earlier than that. And today he uses his talents legitimately, and he's become quite well known. And one of his specialities is copies of Lowry painted by Greenhalgh, and they sell for, well, when I checked on the website, they sell for between 2,700 and 4,800. This one going to the match is on sale for 4,600. The one on the right. And the auction house who sold it said, we had people bidding from all over the world. They were people on the phone, the internet, and the auction room was full. It was buzzing. Shaun Greenhalgh's artwork always attracts a lot of interest. So he's one of these who's been caught, been exposed, gone public, became famous, and is selling work under his own name. And he's written a memoir as well. A Forger's Tale, Confessions of a Bolton Forger. Book was published last year and ended up as a bestseller. And he's been on television as well. He was on BBC's Fake or Fortune. So this is the final Greenhalgh I'm going to be talking about. And many experts claim this is a genuine work by Leonardo. But Greenhalgh claims he created it. Now, who knows? Well, the end result is we don't know. But the Guardian newspaper art critic Jonathan Jones and others like the artist Leo Stevenson both think it's definitely a forgery. They believe that the current owners, and I think it's locked in a vault in Switzerland, the current owners have only carried out scientific tests that support their claim that it's a genuine Leonardo. The vellum, for instance, has been carbon dated to between 1440 and 1650. But 15th century vellum is relatively easy to find. And this is the only work Leonardo created on vellum. And remember, Leonardo was a strict vegetarian. So it's suspicious that this is on vellum. And also it's suspicious because works on vellum are harder to detect as fakes. The provenance, which is a critical aspect of authenticating a paint work, is mysterious. We don't know the full provenance. It's a drawing that looks superficially like a Leonardo, but that in a way is suspicious, and I'll explain why in a moment. Now, in November 2015, Greenhalgh claimed he created the work in 1978, one of his first works when he was 20. And he said that the woman's face is a supermarket checkout girl called Sally, who worked in Bolton. And in his book, A Forger's Tale, which he wrote in prison, he claimed he forged it by buying an old piece of vellum from a land deed of 1587 that he scraped down and reused. And he practiced first by doing this drawing on cartridge paper, he writes in the book. Then he mounted the vellum on an old oak board, so old wood that he found in a storehouse where his father worked. He used just 3 colours, black, white and red, and gum arabic earth pigments that he went over in oak gall ink made in the same way that Leonardo made. Leonardo was left-handed, Greenhalgh was right-handed. So he said what he did is he turned the painting upside down and hatched the strokes from the profile outwards, so it looked as though they'd been done by a left-handed artist. And then he says, the picture to an art dealer in Harrogate, offering it not as a forgery, but as homage to Leonardo. The dealer didn't like it, criticised its quality, and paid him just £80, which barely covered the materials he used, let alone the labour. So as far as he was concerned, it wasn't very successful. It sold for $22,000 later at an auction in 1998, Christie's in New York, catalogued as a 19th century German work. Then in 2007, Peter Silverman bought it from a gallery in New York and claimed the portrait was an older period, possibly dating to the Renaissance. And since that claim was made, a number of experts have attributed it to Leonardo da Vinci. And one of those experts is Martin Kemp, who's actually a world-leading expert on Leonardo. And he made it the subject of a book that he wrote called La Bella Principessa, the story of a new masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci. So he didn't just claim it. He wrote a whole book explaining why he thought that. Let me just show you quickly. I won't go into all the ins and outs of the arguments either way, of which there are many, many arguments. But I'll just show you some other works. The portrait on the left was bought by the Detroit Institute of Art in 1936 as by Leonardo or by Verrocchio. The attribution was made on the strength, the similarity of the curls to a Leonardo painting. It was then later described as an imitator of Verrocchio, not a Leonardo. And in a later book, 2001, it was described as probably a forgery because of its anachronistic materials and unorthodox construction. Probably is putting it a bit weakly, because recent examination shows the picture is painted on photographic paper that's been stuck on a wood panel. So, and at least one of the pigments used is zinc white, so which wasn't available. So the painting on the left is a forgery. The one on the right, which was originally attributed to Piero Poleiuolo in 1945, it's since sunk without trace, and there are many, many forgeries created in the 19th century of such early portraits, because there was a big market for portraits from this period. So the problem with the one in the middle is, I'll just mention, first of all, it's mixed media, as I mentioned, which Leonardo had never used elsewhere, and on vellum. And the look of the woman, this is sort of a personal thing, but my feeling is it's not typical of the period. It's and I'll show you some works from the period in a moment. It looks too modern, in other words. It looks like someone from let me wait till the next slide. It's got no provenance, and it was described, as I said, German school, and it's been rejected by many scholars in New York, London, and Vienna. And this is the final slide I wanted to show you. What we see here is those three at the top in black and white. We only have black and white versions of these two, so I made the one in the middle black and white, and these genuine works down the bottom I turned into black and white. Here they're the same works, so that you could compare them. And these works, these three here, or in fact these three here, have been authenticated by two are by Ambrosio de Predis. One is the one in the middle is by Hirandale, and these are what we believe to be bona fide works. They we have provenance, we have records going back, and notice they're highly individuated. They're richer works than the top three. The top three to me look pretty in a modern sense, and the ones below, perhaps with the exception of the one in the middle, look more authentic. But as I said, who knows? And I've got a bit sidetracked away from my theme of Greenhalgh, but you can see how difficult it is to authenticate. And on a final point, you probably, I thought I didn't want to leave you with the thought that it's definitely not by Leonardo. Look at this. This is by Leonardo. This is authenticated. This is a genuine Leonardo drawing in the Royal Collection. And notice it's left-handed shading. I'm left-handed, so I would shade in that direction. But I'll reverse the image so you can compare them like that. Compare the profiles. Now, of course, a forger like Greenhalgh, who did a lot of research, would be aware of this drawing in the Royal Collection. So maybe he based his drawing not just on the supermarket checkout girl Sally, but on this work he would have known in the Royal Collection as well. So although it sort of adds weight, it just adds more to the story. Let me move on to my final forger, Robert Driessen. His speciality was forging Giacometti's, and there's a short film on YouTube called The Giacometti Affair, which is worth watching. The experts say, and it says in the film, for a forger, people like Giacometti are a gold mine, because Giacometti was working on all these different statues at the same time and never kept any records. And in fact, I looked at an online interview of Driessen, and the interviewer had a similar upbringing to Driessen and understood where he was coming from. Both of them went to art school and art college. Both disappointed to find the art world doesn't support skilled artists, doesn't value skill. I don't know how you make it in the art world. In fact, he said, the interviewer, Jason Bailey, said of all the artists he knew at college, only one now makes a living out of art, and he's a political cartoonist. So you can see, the interviewer could see how Driessen became bitter and turned to forgery to prove his talent and get one back on the art world. But the interviewer, Bailey, believes this is not a victimless crime. He thinks it undermines the whole art market. It makes it harder for up-and-coming artists, as he was, as it erodes trust in the whole market. It's not, he said, a few rascals getting one over on the rich. It's an activity, he believes, that threatens our whole cultural heritage. So Driessen, he was born in Arnhem in the Netherlands. It's estimated he made 3 million euros, but I think that's probably an underestimate. He produced not just Giacometti's, but Jackson Pollock, Salvador Dali, Lucian Freud, Banksy. This is one of these works is by Giacometti, one's by Driessen, and it's the one on the left is Giacometti. He came to the attention of a detective in Stuttgart who specializes in art crimes, and many Giacomettis were appearing on the market, and he had enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant. But by this stage, Driessen had left Germany and was living in Thailand, where there was no extradition treaty. But time passed, and he decided he wanted to come home to see his family for Christmas. But as soon as he actually landed in Holland, he was arrested and extradited to Germany, sentenced to 5 years, but released after 2 for good behavior. So he could then go public. He claims to have forged 1,300 Giacomettis over 30 years, while it's thought Giacometti himself produced only about 500 works. So he flooded the market with Giacomettis. He went back to Thailand with his family. He has a small studio. He makes and sells original reproductions of other artists' work, mainly Giacometti, and he sells them on his website up to 3,000 euros. But every one is stamped with his initials now, so you can't sell them on as a Giacometti. As an aside, by the way, this work, which I've shown you before, Driessen said in an interview, it's absolutely not Da Vinci. As a former art forger, he said, he can spot a fake a mile away. Have you seen the before restoration and after restoration? It's a totally different painting now. It's unbelievable how people can fall for that. Well, that's Driessen's opinion. Experts are divided. This is the most expensive work ever sold at auction. Another Driessen, he forged Picasso. He's chosen 1932 work, which was a very active period for Picasso. And Picasso actually said he preferred this painting to any of the others he produced that year. He can copy any artist. He started by painting in the style of the Dutch Golden Age, Dutch landscapes. And he then switched to Dutch Romantic painters. He then moved on, copied expressionists like Kandinsky and Nolde. Then he started casting sculptures in bronze, which is hard. It's a long, complex process that he learned with much experimentation. And sculptures are, as I said, difficult to date. So he found he had much more success with the sculptures, but he continued to paint in the style of many artists. This one is from his collection. He painted Banksy in these two are signed prints, copies of prints by Banksy, Balloon Girl and Girl Vomiting Hearts, which are available as prints, authenticated prints. Incidentally, if you have a Banksy print, Banksy prints can sell, like Girl with Balloon, the print can sell for £400,000. But there's an organisation that authenticates Banksy's work called Pest Control Office, and it will charge you £100 to £150, although they don't charge you if it's fake. In Thailand, Driessen opened a small restaurant, but he does still sell works, as I said, on his website. This is another couple of final examples. This is a Giacometti drawing compared with the original drawing. I think when you see the two side by side, it's easy to spot the fake. Similarly here, when you see side by side this controversial portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Lucien Freud. It was controversial. Just to give you two opinions, the Times called it painful, brave. This is the Freud, painful, brave, honest, stoical, and above all clear-sighted. And the Guardian said probably the best royal portrait of any royal portrait anywhere for at least 150 years. In contrast, the Sun's royal photographer said Freud should be locked in the tower for this. So it divided opinion. But the point I just wanted to make is that Driessen, I think when you see them side by side, it looks like a parody of Freud's work. And in fact, Driessen says he's not making art, I was copying art. Driessen said, I'm not an artist. And he believes that 30 to 40% of all the art sold in auction houses is forged. Just another angle on this. This is Paul Gauguin, and not by Driessen. This is a copy that was produced by a team of Chinese artists, many of them students, and it was commissioned by an Iranian forger who described it as a case of indentured servitude meets high art. And the fake was good enough to fool the art world. And what gave it away? The fake on the right. It was found to be on sale in the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's, both selling the same painting at the same time. You might think that the fact that the painting was in the National Gallery in London might have made them suspicious. But anyway, that's what gave it away. It was a lowly paid art student can paint, it seems, a copy indistinguishable from the original, as long as no scientific tests are carried out. So I've been talking about the world's greatest forgers, but are they? They're the well-known forgers, certainly, but are they any better than many competent artists who could paint a forgery if they were so minded? Not all artists, but there are some artists who can do it and some can't. I believe there are thousands of such artists, such competent artists in the world who could produce excellent copies if they were so minded. But like most of us, we don't wish to turn to crime. And that comes to the end of today's stories about human forgers. But the art world, I believe, is about to be revolutionized, and in a more fundamental way than forgery. To begin with, fully textured 3D art reproduction is becoming available. You'd soon be able to buy a printed 3-dimensional copy. In other words, you'll be able to feel the paintwork, indistinguishable from the original, as long as you don't do scientific tests, obviously. And digital art is becoming more valuable. But at the same time, AI, artificial intelligence, and systems such as stable diffusion are able to create art in any style from a written description. And this I produced yesterday, the one on the left, side by side with a genuine Samuel Palmer. All I typed into it was produce a landscape in the style of Samuel Palmer. And this is what it produced, the one on the left. Imagine how good it's going to be in a couple of years' time. I did it with a portrait. All I typed in was a portrait in the style of Rembrandt. And if you know Rembrandt, you can probably know which one it is. It's the Rembrandt is the one on the right, and it's a detail from Portrait of Jan Six. But the point I'm making is that this software, Stable Diffusion, their website, you can just type this description into their website and it will produce these works. Maybe not perfect, but imagine how it'll be in 2 years' time. So digital art, which is becoming popular, is easily copied. So how can it retain its value? The answer is non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. Now, you might have read about NFTs in the news, and you might have read stories about people investing fortunes in art where they don't actually own the art, they only own some small part of it. Leaving aside the hype, non-fungible tokens means that the digital art cannot be forged. Just a little explanation of the terms. Fungible means something's interchangeable with other similar items, like can of beans. It doesn't matter when you go into the shop which can of beans you pick up, they're all the same. Or money, like a £5 note or a dollar bill. It has a unique number on it, but that doesn't matter. $1 bill is the same as any other. It's fungible. So non-fungible means something is unique and cannot be replicated. It's not freely interchangeable, like a genuine Rembrandt. So a non-fungible token is a unique item, a token stored in a special computer database called a blockchain, which guarantees the provenance and ownership of the token representing the art world. So with digital work, and we can also do it with physical works, but of course they can be copied. You can have a token representing a physical work, but also an NFT representing a digital work, which is completely protected. So that brings me to the end. Who's the greatest art forger? Well, it depends on the basis you're judging. The most skilled copyist, the most devious scams, the largest number of forgeries, the biggest scams in terms of the total value of all the forgeries. Well, my vote goes to Shaun Greenhalgh, because I believe he's a very British forger. I like the fact that he produced his forgeries in his garden shed. I like the fact he could turn his hand to different media and fool the British Museum. But you probably have your own favourite. Thank you for your attention. Bye for now.